Bienvenidos. Vamos a tener una reunión comunitaria. Si usted necesita traducción en español, por favor, póngalo en el mensaje. Mi nombre es Patricia. Puede mandarme un mensaje privado para decirme que usted necesitará traducción en español. Ahora le cedo el espacio a Lee Todd.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to today's community meeting on the appointment of Bree Spencer to the City of Milwaukee Board of Fire and Police Commissioners. My name is Leon Todd, and I am the Executive Director of the City of Milwaukee Fire and Police Commission. On behalf of the entire Fire and Police Commission, I would like to extend my thanks to all of you for taking the time to participate in this important process. I would now like to offer a brief overview of the appointment process for Ms. Spencer's nomination, as well as the role of members of the Board of Fire and Police Commissioners. On February 8th, 2022, Mayor Cavalier Johnson appointed Bree Spencer to serve on the Board of Fire and Police Commissioners. This appointment is subject to confirmation by the Milwaukee Common Council. The next step in the appointment process will be for the Common Council's Public Safety and Health Committee to hold a hearing on Ms. Spencer's appointment, which is scheduled for Thursday, March 10th at 9 a.m. At that hearing, the Public Safety and Health Committee will consider and vote on whether to recommend the confirmation of Ms. Spencer's appointment. Thereafter, the full Common Council will vote on Ms. Spencer's appointment. Before those votes, we want to ensure that members of our community have an opportunity to hear directly from Ms. Spencer, ask her questions about her background, and learn about her vision for the FPC. We value the input of the residents of the City of Milwaukee because ultimately, we all work for you. The Board of Fire and Police Commissioners is one of the oldest and most powerful civilian-led police and fire oversight agencies in the entire country. The FPC board is comprised of 7 part-time commissioners who are assisted in their work by a full-time staff, which I have the privilege to manage as the commission's executive director. The commission has oversight authority concerning all aspects of the police and fire department's operations, and it serves as the public's voice in police and fire matters. The commission is responsible not only for hiring the chief of police and the fire chief, but also for all the hiring and promotions of every member of both departments. Among other responsibilities, the commission establishes policies and procedures for the police and fire departments, hears appeals by members of the departments who have been disciplined by their chief, and monitors the investigation of citizen complaints. FPC commissioners have a wide range of responsibilities, and Ms. Spencer is well qualified to represent the public in this important role and protect our best interest. Ms. Spencer has a wealth of professional experience and an impressive record of service to our community. I'm excited and grateful that Ms. Spencer has answered the call to serve in this capacity, and I am confident that her service will contribute to a safer and more just future for our city. And now I'm pleased to introduce our moderator for tonight's community meeting, Jarrell Ballard. Mr. Ballard currently serves as the Director of Communications for the Public Service Commission of Wisconsin. As a Milwaukee native, Mr. Ballard has spent his adult life advocating and serving his community through philanthropic engagement and leadership. Since 2009, Mr. Ballard has made recommendations and determined the release of more than $250,000 for service projects throughout the greater Milwaukee area in partnership with the Greater Milwaukee Foundation. He is also the founder and president of Milwaukee's Finest Scholarship Foundation and the co-founder of Lead to Change Incorporation. Before accepting his current role with the state of Wisconsin, Mr. Ballard was a weekday reporter and Sunrise 7 Sunday anchor for CBS WSAW 7 and Fox WZAW in north central Wisconsin. Throughout his reporting career, Mr. Ballard covered a wide range of local, regional, and national stories. Following his television career, Mr. Ballard served as the Marketing and Communications Officer for the Milwaukee Police Department. Mr. Ballard, thank you for being here with us today and for moderating this community meeting.
Thank you so much, Lee, for that introduction. First and foremost, I want to say thank you to the City of Milwaukee for inviting me to serve as the moderator for tonight. I believe that it's so important to have community participation at every level of government. So thank you for tuning in and participating tonight and submitting some questions ahead of time. And thank you for those of you who are going to submit some questions tonight. I'll start off by going a little bit more into detail about Bree. Mayor Johnson has selected Bree Spencer to fill the seat on the Milwaukee Fire and Police Commission. Spencer is a respected authority on law enforcement and its interactions with residents. She is the policing program manager at the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights. Before that, she worked in a senior position at the Milwaukee Safe and Sound. She holds a Master's of Public Administration's degree from Syracuse University and has been active in several local community groups. If her appointment is approved by Common Council, Spencer will join the Fire and Police Commission as the 7th member, which reduces the possibility of votes of a tied vote among the members. Bree, feel free to take a moment and introduce yourself.
Thanks so much, Jarrell, and thanks so much for moderating this evening. Appreciate everyone who's attending. Thanks for taking time out to come see me, hear what I have to say, and for just generally engaging with public safety here in the city of Milwaukee. Yeah, as reported, Bree Spencer. I've lived in Milwaukee for 10 years now. Started when I moved here, started out at Safe and Sound and spent 9 years there in different capacities. Started out working as a neighborhood safety coordinator at the 5th Police District on Bell, Phillips, and Locust. Then I became the program director, moved on to the director of evaluation and technical assistance, where I did evaluation of our impact internally and stood up a technical assistance program, which is nonprofit basically for consulting. It started a fee-for-service consultancy to take some of our insights from working in Milwaukee to other places where we might be able to help people think outside the box about public safety and community engagement. And from there, about a year ago, almost exactly a year, March 29th, I've been at the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights, which is a legacy civil rights organization that fights for an America as good as its ideals. I work with the justice team there and focus on our policing portfolio, which includes some programmatic work and also some federal policy advocacy work. I'm excited to be here tonight and have the opportunity potentially to serve in this capacity for the city of Milwaukee. So yeah, thank you.
Awesome. Thanks again, Bree, for your willingness to participate. Once again, we did receive a few questions ahead of time, and then I also have some questions in front of me. But feel free to utilize the chat box as I will be checking that throughout the discussion. And if you do have a question, feel free to type that in there and I will be sure to get to it. So Bree, let's get started. The very first question that I have for you this evening, one of the most important responsibilities of the Fire and Police Commission Board is to select the Chief of Police and a Fire Chief. Should you have the opportunity as an FPC Commissioner, what type of experiences and qualifications would you look for in a Chief of Police, and what type of experiences and qualifications would you look for in a Fire Chief?
Thank you. That's a great question. So I can speak a lot more to the police chief question right now. I want to be fully candid. I have a gap for the fire department. I have a very good sense of general issues that apply to first responders, but I've spent a lot of time working with law enforcement and really not much time with MFD. So one of the first things on my to-do list in my first 90 days is to spend time with the fire chief, see if I can get a ride along, see if I can get some understanding of where members of the fire department think the department is and where it should go. So that's kind of how I answer the second part of that question. For the police chief, first and foremost, I want somebody who engages with the community directly. I want to see them directly engaged with residents. But preferably, I would have liked to. In this case, I actually knew Chief Norman when he was a lieutenant in District 5. I also saw him work as a captain in District 3. I've been at community events when the press isn't there and I see how he interacts with members of the public. I like to see that and see that kind of engagement, true commitment to community-oriented policing, which is more than just a written policy, but in how you conduct yourself, the expectations you set for your officers, and the way you supervise. Also the way I would ideally chiefs, they know how to manage people well, and they have built a bench up behind them. They surround themselves with good people who also know how to manage. I think there's a lot of important detail that can be learned about how a chief will lead from how they've been in their time in that either in that police department or the one that they came from. Like, I want to see good leadership at every supervisory level, sergeant, lieutenant, captain, and so on. I think I would use those as sort of the framework. And I also think, there needs to be community hearings when a new chief is up. Who did the community see as the best potential candidate? All of that's really important.
Thank you, Bree. And one of the things that you mentioned was going on ride-alongs, which is something that I had the opportunity to do when I was working for the police department. That brings me to the next question that we have here. This was submitted by someone during pre-registration. What are 3 things that you would like to accomplish within the first 30 days, 60 days, and 1 year if selected on the Fire and Police Commission?
So 30 days is getting my feet wet and getting my hands in all the information that I need to have as a starting off Fire and Police Commissioner. I think it's going to involve a lot of meetings with fellow commissioners, getting to know other people on the commission, making sure that I know who I need to know within the Fire and Police Commission, the paid staff as well. And one thing that I think is really important and was brought up to me today when I was speaking to an alderperson is how important it is that Fire and Police Commissioners are accessible to the public. And so I think of it also like to start thinking immediately about ways to make that true and make sure that Fire and Police Commissioners are accessible. And I can't control everybody, but I can certainly control myself. So figuring out ways to either set up a standard, trying to make sure I get through the city to different community meetings on a regular basis, that kind of thing. 6 months in, I'd like to have a very solid understanding of the standard operating procedures of both the Fire and Police Department. It's going to require a lot of reading and asking questions on my part, but I'm kind of into that, so that's okay. I feel like I'll have a very good grasp, and that base of knowledge is really important for being able to make meaningful change, right? Like, you got to understand what is before you can move towards what can be. So I think at 6 months, that's where I would hope to be. And within a year, I really want to know where we are with the Collins Agreement, understand what the annual audit processes are for the Fire and Police Commission, like how often we need to be checking up on standard operating procedures and trying to move, if possible, and again, I don't know yet, but I think it would be good to work in a commission that is working towards proactive engagement on positive change, and not necessarily always having to react when something happens. I mean, we do have to react when things happen, but also being able to look forward as well. And I think from everything I've seen of my fellow commissioners, if I get to confirmed, that's the direction the FPC is headed. So I feel confident about that.
A lot of good follow-up questions with that. This brings me to the next question that was also submitted during pre-registration. Are there any specific MPD policies or procedures that are of priority for you to either update, amend, or appeal if elected to the Fire and Police Commission?
I mean, I have some questions just based off of the current ask of community groups. Well, I think this is an ask that's come up before, but it's coming up again in response to the recent events in District 5, the death in custody, which is tragic, and then the subsequent shooting in the police district station, that MPD release body cam footage within 48 hours of critical incidences. And this is an issue that I think is extremely important. It's extremely important generally. It is extremely important to the community. I need to understand a lot more before I can say what I think makes the most sense in terms of a policy. I know that the Fire and Police Commission is taking this up as an issue and looking into it now. But I immediately have some additional questions because of my work at the national level, working on police policy generally. I do know that there are some practices in police departments, like sometimes allowing officers to view body-worn camera footage before they have to take down, before they have to write down their experience in the critical incident, or giving officers rest periods before they have to give their kind of testimony about what happened. And so I have some questions about policies like that and how those can be made better. That's one example.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. Speaking of the incident that just recently happened at District 5, it's no secret that police officers can sometimes experience traumatic experiences as well. What are some ways that we can support police officers who routinely deal with traumatic situations on their shift?
I think this is such an important point. I had a ride along once with an officer from MPD who told me, and I will never forget as long as I live, he told me he was somebody who had served, he was a military veteran, and he was a 14-year officer of the Milwaukee Police Department. And we were just chatting in the car, and he was saying, you know, PTSD is something we're starting to talk about for soldiers. It's not something that we're talking about really yet with police officers. And he said, you know, I have seen much more difficult stuff here in the city where I live than I saw when I was at war. And this is where I live. And so I think that is, I mean, that really struck a chord with me. And I think it's the mental health of police officers and first responders generally as well, I'm going to include MFD in this, is so important to the quality of services they're able to provide, their longevity in the role, and also just like it's a moral imperative that we care about people who've been impacted by trauma. And that's true if they're first responders or if they're members of this community. So I think it is an essential piece that is, I don't know that it's all the way missing, but I think it's largely missing from the picture of how departments operate. And that's not right. So I would like to see some more formal practices in place for helping officers when they are in a mental health crisis or a post-traumatic stress disorder situation where they've seen something incredibly difficult and or been engaged in something incredibly difficult. I mean, it's just it really cannot be overstated the importance of this issue. So I don't know exactly what all the framework is within the police department and the fire department now to help address, but when I worked out of the District 5 station, there's definitely a culture of, you know, not like there being a safe space for officers necessary to be honest about if they're struggling in that way, in my experience.
Thank you. Let's talk about diversity. Milwaukee is a very diverse city, but we're also very segregated. Both the police department and the fire department have struggled to recruit and retain diverse workforces. What strategies do you think would help bring more voices and experiences into those departments?
That's a fantastic question as well. These are all great. Yeah, oh my gosh. So I think there's a bunch of different things. There's so many answers to this question, and they're all parts of the puzzle. One, diversifying a police department is not going to guarantee that the police department behaves in a way that the public likes. So I think it's an important piece of the puzzle, but it's not going to solve all of the issues that community, you know, that we have as a community and ways we want to see policing improve. But I do think it's very important that people who are serving the community, like in the police department and fire departments, reflect the community that they serve. So diversity is key there. I think it's really difficult to recruit into police departments when in the criminal legal system, there's disparity of treatment between white people and Black and brown people. And so trust deficit costs the department recruits. It does. So working on the trust and building trust between community members and law enforcement is essential for people wanting to have people who want to go into law enforcement. One. Two, I think there's a lot of ways the police department has worked to make law enforcement accessible, like with the police and aid program, the fire cadet program, and also doing things like you can get hired with a high school diploma, but within a certain period of time, you have to get your, I think it's 90 credits or whatever it is for an AA degree. That makes it a little more accessible. I wonder if it's possible to partner with local colleges and figure out ways to help support those college programs so that people can get into those degree programs with some scholarship or some supports. I think could be helpful. I'm, side note, very interested in, I think you can get those credits in any kind of discipline to go towards your policing credit. And I wonder why that is. It seems like it ought to be social work, psychology, potentially CJ, right? Like there's criminal justice programming. I'm interested to learn why it's so open and why, see if it's something that perhaps we can adjust. Those are 3 things that come to mind right away. But those are the big ones for me on that question.
Great, thank you. Let's move to the board structure. Given all of the controversies surrounding the FPC in the last recent years, why would you say you're interested in joining on the commission?
Amazing. Okay, so that's real. If you would have asked me to be on the Fire and Police Commission 2 years ago, I would have said no. I would have said no because I work at Safe and Sound, and to me that would be a conflict of interest. Like that would have been very difficult. But also no, because it was not clear that it was a functioning body that was, you know, doing what it needed to do. And I'm not in that situation, so I'm not trying to, you know, cast aspersions or anything. It just wasn't clear to me what was going on. Flash forward to now, I no longer work at a community-based organization in Milwaukee. I work for a DC organization, but I work permanently from Milwaukee. So happy to be bringing some DC dollars to spend here in the city of Milwaukee. But almost the entire board has turned over in the time. And there's been a lot of other significant changes, like leadership at the policing department. That to me sets, as I said, I've known Norman for a very long time. Sorry, Chief Norman. Habit of working with law enforcement for a long time is I know everyone's last names, and that's mainly what I say. But you know, seeing how he came up into his current position has me feeling more optimistic than I've ever felt since I've lived in the city of Milwaukee about the potential for positive change and positive movement at the police department. And I can say the same of the Fire and Police Commission now as well. I'm excited to work with the commissioners that are there.
Great. So we know that if you are the newest member on the Fire and Police Commission, you will be the 7th member, which means you will sometimes possibly have to break a tie between you and your colleagues. So how do you anticipate navigating that situation to make sure you're making the best decision, not only for the residents, but also for the departments?
I mean, I can talk about sort of my principles and my thought processes now. I don't have the full framework yet of how the board functions and all the information that is available to the board from each of the departments, and also like alders, community members, and the mayor, right? Like I haven't been in the situation to like feel all those opposing, not necessarily opposing, but like differing levers of pressure, I guess, and how they can be applied simultaneously. But I think in general, I've spent a long time working with law enforcement, and particularly when I was a neighborhood safety coordinator, the value of that role, like to do that role well and to be a value add, you're meant to hold your civilian perspective while working with a diverse team in terms of like law enforcement and different interests at the table. And I think that practice of being clear-minded, being fair-minded, really caring about the facts. The facts matter a lot into the decisions that get made. Knowing about policy generally, all this stuff plays in. And I am a conscientious person, right? Like I sort of, to the point that it's annoying, think about matters. And so usually when people ask me, hey, why did you do X or why did you do Y? I can explain it to them, or I can say, this was my thinking. And so that's the kind of mental framework and principle that I will operate under. And relationships matter a lot, and good relationships allow you to have disagreements and still have good relationships. And so that's kind of like clear-eyed, learn as much as I can, apply my knowledge. I think community is king in terms of perspective of all those pressure points. Like the Fire and Police Commission is there to represent the community. It's a civilian oversight board for a reason. So listening to the community and the community perspectives on any given issue is going to be a really important piece of that decision making as well for me.
Great, thank you, Bree. And I just want to take a moment and say, if you do have a question from the audience, feel free to utilize the chat box. I did see a few hands raised, so if you do have a question, feel free to utilize that chat box, and I'll try to pull that question out for you. Bree, the next question that we have here for you is, if you are confirmed to the FPC, can you please talk about ways you would seek community input beyond receiving public comments during the open meetings? How will you ensure that your perspective is consistently informed by the community that you represent?
Yeah, this is so important, and it's so important to think about it ahead of time, because I think in the beginning it'll feel very much like drinking from a fire hose kind of deal, right? There's a lot going on. I spent a lot of time, because I worked at Safe and Sound, in community meetings, and there is a lot to be gained from being in the room and not speaking. I think for me, the engagement that would be most impactful is probably being at community meetings and listening to what folks have to say, and not like Fire and Police Commissioner Bree Spencer is coming to the meeting, but like knowing when community meetings are happening and showing up as a participant, as a listener in the audience to hear what people are, sharing, what they're dealing with, what they're seeing where they live. It's old school, but it's, I think, very, very valuable. And you make relationships with folks along the way doing that. I mean, I'm still in contact with people that I knew from, being a neighborhood safety coordinator. That's relationship building at its core. Yeah. I think community meetings, I think making sure people know how to contact me is another piece. But those are the two main things that come to mind.
Perfect, thank you. There are a wide range of beliefs of what police officers should be responsible for. So what do you believe are some of the responsibilities currently expected of police officers that you believe should be better suited by another entity?
So my perspective is that we need to broaden our thinking about public safety generally. It is a huge issue. It is wildly impacted. It is impacted hugely by other things. So social determinants of health, resource scarcity, all these things impact public safety significantly. And it's not right. It's not really fair. And it's also not right. And it also doesn't get us the results we want, as we've seen, to put all that on the shoulders of first responders, especially when that support comes at the detriment of supporting other types of initiatives. So I've said this a few times today as I've been talking to people, but I think it's fairly relevant. So I'm going to say it again, which is the Homicide Review Commission is something that people may or may not be familiar with, but it's kind of like a research and social impact project that originated in Milwaukee and has now, I think, started in other places as well. It's a way that data analysts and researchers try to work to identify. They really break down, like if a homicide happens, they really break down and look at the suspect and their whole record and the victim and their whole record. And I went to several of these when I was a neighborhood safety coordinator, the law enforcement sessions. And the takeaway for me that will truly haunt me, I guess, for the rest of my life is that for every single one I went to, and I mean, I really can't stress this enough, every single one, when you look at the records of the suspect and the victim, they had been telling us for years that something wasn't right for them. And I just looked at I would just look at that and say, for 20 years, there were intervention points that never got picked up. There were moments when, upstream solution, some kind of strategy to help people off-road to other actions or other opportunity just slipped by. And that is both morally not right, and it is also not practical. Like it's both not the right thing to do, and it doesn't make sense to leave it. And so that's my kind of philosophical approach to thinking about what police are doing. And I think really obvious points are mental health engagement, like law enforcement responding to mental health crises, substance use disorder, all the places where there's a non-criminalizing way to deal with the situation. And so shrinking the footprint for law enforcement, I think, is really, really important. And I think, like by volume, we ask first responders to do too much. And I think we could ask, if we can shrink that footprint, we should also be able to increase our ask of professionalism and quality of care and quality of service, and that there's some right sizing that needs to happen there. And I think that right sizing can also help, as I said, sort of broaden our view of how to improve public safety.
Thank you. When it comes to standard operating procedures, what role, if any, do you think the community should play when creating those for law enforcement or Fire and Police Commission?
Well, certainly every community member in the city of Milwaukee has the right to voice their opinion about what should happen with police procedure. I think the CCC, the Community Collaborative, I always get it, it's 3 C's. Community Collaborative Committee, I think, is doing a lot of work on the collaborative agreement still that came from DOJ. And I think they're also working on the Collins Agreement stuff. So I think that it's like individual people have the right and should have access and the ability to speak on those issues. And there's also bodies of community members and advocate groups that are working more collectively to speak up on those issues. I certainly think that community opinions are relevant, and the Fire and Police Commission is at the very least there to hear what those are, but also should be taking into consideration how the people in the city of Milwaukee want to be served by these 2 departments.
Great, thank you. What does community-oriented policing look like to you, and can you provide us an example?
Yeah, definitely. So this is a phrase that gets used a lot nationally in different places, and I can tell you that it's implemented wildly differently between police departments. So it is really important to know what the definition and conception of community-oriented policing is here in Milwaukee. There is that COP SOP here for the police department. I do think, and I read through it, it's part of the Dana Will Patterson called it the FBC Bible, which I liked. So it's part of the FBC Bible that I got from Lee when I got nominated. There's a lot I like about it. I think it's really, really important for me. Like for me, when I think about community-oriented policing, it is not reducible to community members better understanding what police do. This is a 2-way street. Community-oriented policing means it's 2-way. It means community members see police as, sort of people, but it also means police see community members as people. And so that's something that's really important to me in thinking through the current COP procedure in the Milwaukee Police Department. And that is a hill I will die on, because that's so important to me. It can't be just about getting people to understand police. Police have to understand the communities they're serving as well. An example of good community-oriented policing. So as part of my work with the Racine Police Department, I was hired to write this thing called the COP House Playbook. And Racine has a unique model. They call them COP houses, community-oriented policing houses. And it was started in Racine in the mid-90s. And it's spread to some other regions. And there's one in St. Cloud, Minnesota, or not, it's spread across this region, the upper Midwest. There's one in St. Cloud, Minnesota, that I was incredibly impressed with and thought it was really a prime example of what's possible with community-oriented policing. It's a residential house that the police department's essentially turned into a thriving community center where people can access police services, but they also were able to subcontract with Mayo Clinic to get an ambulance driver out of that house as a substation, because people in that neighborhood it was taking forever when they needed an EMT. They have a mobile dental clinic that comes in, so people can get access to dental work once a month very easily by walking down the street. They have after school programming. They have ESL classes. It's a neighborhood that's predominantly in St. Cloud. It's an interesting combination. It's predominantly Somalian refugees and students from St. Cloud University. And the level of care, the level of engagement, the level that officers were able to actually know community members by name, community members knew officers, and were able to access additional services that, as I mentioned earlier, like directly positively contribute to social determinants of health, was incredible.
Great, thank you. And it looks like the audience is starting to pour in with a few questions as well. We do have a question that just came in. We kind of spoke about the incident at District 5 a little bit earlier in the conversation. This question is asking specifically, how would you deal with the death of a person while in custody at MPD?
All I have right now are a lot of questions. I want to understand impetus for being the young man being pulled over. I want to understand why he was taken into custody, what kind of warrant, if there was a warrant, was it a bench warrant? I have heard that those were all traffic related, but I'm not sure that's true yet. I, again, don't have all the information. I don't understand why someone was in holding for 16 hours at a district station, so I would like to know more about that. I also, I have a lot of questions, and I think that's right. And as a fire and police commissioner, I'll be able to ask those questions and get answers. And I think that's the first most important step. And also in my work with the leadership conference, data collection and reporting, police data collection and reporting is hugely problematic. There are a lot of gaps with it. Some of it has to do with infrastructure. When I started working in District 12, man, those computers were old. Okay, I think there was Clippy on the computer. You remember Clippy? I mean, old. And so some of it has to do, right, with having the right equipment and make sure officers have the right equipment, but there's also a need for like key standards, standard definition and practices, making sure data is collected accurately, quickly, and that it's being reported out and made available to the public wherever possible. So transparency is a key tenet of what I think is important about policing. And so I'll be bringing that to the table. And I think along with that kind of explains sort of the questions. Like, there's a lot of questions. And because of my experience with law enforcement and working on law enforcement policy, I think I have some additional insights that will be helpful on like what questions to ask, I guess, in these types of circumstances.
Right, absolutely. Thank you. Another question that was submitted.
Sorry, can I say one more thing about that, Drill? Sorry. So in my work at the leadership conference, which is going to be completely separate from the Fire and Police Commission, I'm involved advocating for the proper implementation of the Death in Custody Reporting Act, which is a piece of legislation that passed federally in 2013, but has never actually been implemented at the federal level. And it's connected to this data collection issue. We can't tell you, no one can tell you how many people die in custody, either in police custody or Bureau of Prisons in any given year in the United States, and that's appalling. So I just wanted to mention that as well, that there's policy and practice levers that can be pulled in lots of different places, and hopefully they'll all be working towards the same thing, which is getting the information we need and then changing our practices so that these incidences occur far less, hopefully never. Sorry, Drill.
Yeah, no problem. We have a few more questions coming in from the audience as well. Another question, I'm going to turn to reckless driving. We know that this is a hot topic here in the city of Milwaukee. What do you think the role of law enforcement should be as the part when it comes to reckless driving in the city of Milwaukee?
Again, definitely need a lot more information on the Fire and Police Commission side of things, right? Like, I sort of have my general perspective as a citizen of the city of Milwaukee. again, I go to social determinants a lot. You know, there was a huge span of time when driver's ed wasn't available to most people who were taking classes in the city, which is hugely problematic. There was the back and forth with policy on whether or not officers could chase when somebody was doing reckless driving. There's been a lot of mixed messages, and there's been a lot of hesitation on what the right strategy is. I've seen that. I feel like I've seen the effects of that as I'm driving around the city. But I feel like I need a lot more information before I could say, like, this is my stance on the policy. I do think police traffic enforcement and the value that comes with police doing traffic enforcement is specious to me. Like, I'm not sure it's quite what people think, and I'm not sure it's what law enforcement thinks it is. Partially because I was doing work recently on around DDAX, which is this program that's funded largely through the Department of Transportation. The Department of Transportation gives hundreds of millions of dollars every year to policing for traffic enforcement. And I think it needs revisiting. I think that in general, the police engagement with traffic enforcement, the idea that traffic enforcement actually stops crime, is something that I've got questions about.
Great, thank you. We spoke on reckless driving. Let's talk about gun violence and gun-related homicides. They're at an all-time high in our city. Do you believe police play a role, and how can police address this issue before violence occurs?
Yeah, I think I'm not sure how easily they can. I don't think they're set up to do a lot of preventative work when it comes to homicide, outside of perhaps showing up to an incident when someone calls and being able to prevent a critical incident in that moment from happening. Maybe there's, that's where they could do preventative work. I think, again, we're talking violence intervention. We're talking some of the strategies outlined in the Blueprint for Peace. There's been a complete lack of investment in, or not complete total lack, but there's been very little investment in these types of strategies in the city of Milwaukee. And I would like to see a lot more. That's unfortunately not in my purview as a fire and police commissioner. I don't know if that's unfortunate, but you know what I'm saying? Like, I don't know. I'm just trying to say my purview as a fire and police commissioner is very limited to police policy. But certainly as a citizen of the, city of Milwaukee, I'm an advocate for upstream solutions, preventative solutions, so that we're not always having to be reactive to tragedy.
Now, this is a question that just came in from someone listening in. What will you do to help bring awareness of what is happening when it comes to FPC conducting business in the Spanish-speaking communities and other communities with little knowledge of what FPC does?
Yeah, I'm happy to take the show on the road if that's useful. You know what I mean? I think there's already an online, there's a Facebook presence for the Fire and Police Commission, and I think that's going to get even more active over time. For me, in my experience working in the city of Milwaukee, direct connections with folks is what's most impactful. So I think it might take a few commissioners coming to community events, or making it clear that we're willing to do that and come and speak with people directly. I know that the Fire and Police Commission also recently hired a community outreach coordinator, who is awesome. Her name is Maritza Ugarte. I've worked with her for like 7 years. I think we worked for a long time together at Safe and Sound, and she is a fantastic community advocate and liaison. So I know that her efforts will be very instrumental in exactly addressing the question, getting more communities aware of what's going on in the Fire and Police Commission. But there can always be better, more efficient digital communication, and making sure commissioners are accessible to the public and showing up, sort of proactively to things instead of waiting for people to come to us.
Great. Another question that just came in from someone listening in: if elected, if the community would bring up the issue of PTSD caused by MPD, how would you react?
Yeah, trauma and experience with trauma is real. And one of the things I've advocated for as a member in my professional life is for a broad, like 25 category, different definitions and categories for use of force to be captured by police departments, because I think, you know, the traumatic events that get the most attention are the ones that end in the death. But getting jumped out on by an officer and taken to the ground is something, you know, like I always think, if I'm walking down the street in my neighborhood and someone jumps out and takes me to the ground, I'm going to remember that for the rest of my life. And then what if it's a police officer? And what if I see that happening to people around me, or my family members, or it's something I see more than once in my life, or even once in my life? Like, I think it's really, like, critically important as we assess the future of policing and first response generally in the United States, to think about cost and harm and how to minimize both of those and maximize sort of people feeling safe, people being safe. Yeah, so I think if a community member brought that up, I would not be surprised, and I would not balk at it, because it's something that needs to be considered. Trauma is real for members of the public, and it's real for officers, and all trauma and people's traumatic experiences matter, and are things that we really need to address.
Great, thank you, Bree. We have a question here about the Milwaukee Fire Department, and before we get to that one, I wanted to ask a question here. What are some ways that we can encourage police officers to report misconduct by other officers?
I really appreciate this, because I don't know who said it, I don't remember, and I hear it a bunch, but I really believe it. Like, culture eats strategy for breakfast. And the culture of the police department matters a lot to how officers feel in-house and how they perform out-house, like out, you know what I mean? Like inside the station and outside the station. I read a paper once that was about how it was kind of assessing the impact of procedural justice, and how being treated in a procedurally just way internally within the department could impact whether or not an officer treated others outside the department with in procedurally just ways. So I think the culture of the department is a really important key to how misconduct is handled, whether or not people feel like they can intervene on someone while someone's having a bad reaction, or actually in the middle of I can't think of a word besides conduct, but conducting an act of misconduct. Do you know what I mean? So I think there's some culture questions there, and that's something I'm really interested in learning more about, and learning about how policy at the police department can impact the police department culture. But I also know there are some programs that exist, like there's something called ABLE, which is an acronym, and I cannot remember what the acronym is, but it's out of the Georgetown law. And I actually think it was meant to come here to Milwaukee, but it's essentially a training that helps police officers, specifically trains police officers on interpersonal intervention, like within rank. This is one of the things really challenging about a quasi-military structure, is that people often do not feel comfortable checking behavior of someone on their same rank or higher. And so this ABLE training is supposed to help get at that type of thing. So those are two things that come to mind.
Great, awesome. Another question we have here from someone listening in. What are your thoughts on how to better support Milwaukee Fire Department and preventative initiatives to save lives?
Again, my caveat, just real quick, I don't know as much about MFD as I do about MPD, so I have a lot to learn there. So I'm sure that if you ask me this question in like 90 days, I'll have a more robust answer. And in fact, I invite you to ask me this question again in 90 days. I think it's really important. I do know from my time at Safe and Sound, the way that we did mainly work with MFD, or that I interacted with MFD, was when they would come out with us to do outreach. And they were there, they asked people like, hey, do you have smoke detectors? Are they working? And they would actually install smoke detectors for free for people in their homes. And that's one perfect example, I think, of ways that they can be proactive. We do know that we have a problem with smoke detectors being active and working in homes in Milwaukee. We do have house fires sometimes that are horrible. And so I think that that's an example of one example of ways that they are proactive, and perhaps that could be expanded. I also know that I was at a community day at Lloyd Hopkins School where they brought, all of us have a specific name and I don't remember, but they have like this little trailer that sort of is it's like a sample of what a house is like when it first starts on fire. So kids go through it to learn to stay below the smoke line and test the doorknobs and make sure that it's safe and how to move through the house. And so I think that's another example. But I'm sure that when I know more about the department, there are a lot of different creative ways, even within the balance of a tight budget, to figure out how to focus on proactive opportunities.
Great, thank you, Bree. And we do have about 9 more minutes left here too. So make sure you're typing in those questions if you have any more questions. Another question that came in is, do you believe that after using chemical weapons against Black Lives Matter protests in Milwaukee, that the Milwaukee Police Department should have more than half of the city's overall budget?
So first asterisk is the Fire and Police Commission has absolutely no authority over the police budget whatsoever. So I can express my opinion on the matter, but that's not something that's that I'm going to be able to impact directly as a Fire and Police Commissioner, the size of the police budget. I think there's a couple of things here, right? There's a couple of things to unpack. One of them is the use of chemical weapons, access to chemical weapons, the choice to deploy chemical weapons. What are the policies around that, and have they changed at all since that happened? That's the 6 and McKinley incident, I think, and specifically being referred to, although I think there were others as well. But the big one that comes to mind is the 6 and McKinley. So I have questions around that. I think there's a policy, standard operating procedure questions that need to be looked at as sort of, probably they always needed to be looked at, but especially as a consequence of that, those incidences and what happened in the summer of 2020. Size of the Fire and Police Commission, or the Fire Department budget, which is like 47 to 49% of the city's entire budget. I would go back to what I said about our scope and view of public safety, that we really have to think of public safety beyond just first response, and then we have to size first response accordingly. Figuring out ways to have civilian engagement on matters that do not require a sworn officer with a firearm to be there and to respond are a central feature of thinking about this more broadly. Yeah.
Great, Bree. Another question that has come in from someone listening in is, have you read or seen the info on community policing?
Well, I've seen the Milwaukee Police Department policy on community-oriented policing. I attended the Wisconsin WACOP is what it's called, Wisconsin Association for Community-Oriented Policing. I've been to the Problem-Oriented Policing Conference. I've been to the IACP conference, which is a International Association of Chiefs of Police. So I've seen a lot of the community-oriented policing like examples, case studies, programs from other places by attending conferences like this. And I also know, as I said earlier, like community-oriented policing is a phrase that's used a lot. It's bandied about a lot in police departments across the country, and it looks very, very different in different places. I will say so I teach this evaluation class at UWM. It's like an introductory program evaluation course for first year master's students. I don't know if I mentioned that, but it's connected to the evaluation work I did at Safe and Sound. And one of the things that has come up for me over and over again from that line of work is evaluations often relegated like to the end of something. People do a bunch of stuff, or they do a program, they take an action, and at the end they think, oh, we should measure whether or not it worked, right? In businesses, they have quality assurance departments, and quality assurance is relegated to one part of the business. There's research that suggests that doing that is actually really problematic because it makes everyone who's not on the quality assurance team think that quality is not their responsibility. Similarly, with community-oriented policing, if you have a handful of officers who are considered to be the community-oriented policing officers, the same thing occurs within a police department. People say, well, I'm not a community-oriented policing officer, so that's not my job. For a community-oriented policing philosophy to be effective, it needs to be top down, side to side. Everyone thinks it's their responsibility. I don't know, again, I definitely feel like a broken record, so I'm sorry about that, but I have a lot more to learn about how it actually shows up for the Milwaukee Police Department, and both what it says on paper and also how it shows up in practice. Sometimes there are gaps between those two things. But that's kind of my thinking around it. That's what I've known and been engaged with previously about community-oriented policing.
Great, Bree, and it looks like we don't have any more questions in the chat box, but if you do have some, go ahead and put those in there now. Bree, I wanted to give you a few moments here before 7 o'clock just to say anything you would like to say to those listening.
Of course, I was on mute. Can't get through a whole Zoom meeting without accidentally being on mute. I mean, I've just talked for a whole hour, so I don't have a whole lot more to say other than I'm really honored to have this opportunity to serve the city of Milwaukee in this way. It is, I think, critically important work, and I hope to bring, I hope that my experience brings a new and unique perspective to the commission to add to the voices of the people that are already there. And yeah, I'm so grateful people came and wanted to, you know, sort of talk to me about this stuff and ask me questions. We'll see what happens. I'm hopeful.
Thank you, Bree. If there are no more questions in the chat box, I am going to go ahead and wrap this up. Bree, thank you for taking the time to answer some really tough questions tonight. Good luck on your nomination process. Obviously, you have some more questions that you'll probably have to ask by Common Council, but I'm sure you'll do great. And for everyone who participated in the process tonight, thank you for participating. As I said in the very beginning, it's important that we have community participation at all levels of government. So thank you for tuning in and listening. I hope everyone has a great week. And Bree, good luck.
Thank you so much, Jarrell, and thanks again for moderating this evening.
Thank you.